So in looking at the classifications and terminology, the two standard exception classifications are 8810 suffix 1, clerical office employees, and 8742 suffix 1, salespersons outside. Before we get started, please note that some employers' overall business operations are assigned to classifications that include terminology such as all employees or all operations. These terms do not prevent assignment of qualified employees to a standard exception classification. There are, however, a few classifications that include phrases such as including clerical office employees or including outside salespersons, if the intent is to specifically include such employees. The WCIRB has formatting standards for its classification inspection reports. What you're looking at here is a mock-up of a payroll table section from an inspection report. The basic business operations of the employer, in this case wooden table manufacturing, are listed first, followed by outside salespersons and ending with clerical office employees. Why are these classifications described as standard exceptions? The definitions will show that they are an exception to the basic classification applicable to the business, provided these employees have only standard exposures. It really does not matter what industry a clerical office employee or outside salesperson is working in support of, as they are isolated from any of the employer's basic business operations. In other words, the functions that they're providing are general support functions that are standard or universal to all industries and are not industry specific. Clerical office employees. Clerical office employees are limited to administrative office functions. These functions must be their only job duties. Many employees spend much of their time working in an office, but also have additional job responsibilities that take them away from an office environment. These employees cannot be classified as a standard exception clerical office employee. Clerical office employees must have job duties that are 100% clerical in nature and that are performed entirely within a clerical office environment to qualify as a standard exception. If an employee works partly in an office capacity, but also has exposure to job duties outside of the office, they must have their entire payroll assigned to the highest rated classification to which they're exposed. It is not allowed to divide an employee's payroll partly between the clerical office classification and partly into any other classification. Clerical office employees with outside selling or collecting work away from the office may potentially qualify as outside salespersons. Clerical office employees must be separated from all other business operations by buildings, floors, partitions, railings, or counters. I want to point out that very often you'll hear the term physical separation used to describe how two operations may be separated one from another. Please note that the separation requirement for clerical is different and is in fact a little bit easier to achieve than physical separation. While most employers have clerical office workspaces that are separated by walls, the USRP requires that a clerical office workspace be separated by, at the very least, partitions, railings, or counters. In addition, there must be only clerical work performed within this separated workspace. Outside salespersons are the second type of standard exception employee. They spend at least some of their time away from the employer's location, engaged in sales, collection, or public relations work. Note that they're not allowed to perform other duties, such as product delivery, installation or repair work, or other functions. This issue sometimes arises with employees that are described as route salespersons. When outside salespersons are back at their employer's own location, they are subject to the same conditions and restrictions as a clerical office employee. Many employees who do not sell goods or services are nonetheless assigned as outside salespersons based on performing a combination of outside public relations work and clerical office work. Some businesses are comprised only of standard exception employees. The USRP contains an example of an investment firm where all employees are qualified for assignment to clerical office or to outside salespersons. However, if this employer hires an employee to perform cleaning and maintenance operations around the office, this new employee will not meet the definition for either an outside salesperson or a clerical office employee. Such maintenance employees are separately classified as 9015, suffix 1, building operations, when the employer is otherwise limited to standard exception classifications. A limited number of classifications specifically include either clerical office employees or outside salespersons, or both. Industry classifications are generally structured in this way when it may be difficult to accurately identify pure clerical or outside sales employees for some employers in that industry. When a classification specifically includes clerical or outside sales employees, it is not possible to avoid this requirement by moving them to a separate location. The pure premium rate calculations for such classifications require that the clerical or outside sales employees be included in the blend of data for that classification. Without the relevant clerical or sales data, the data blend for that classification will be incorrect. For example, classification 8019 applies to businesses that offer document duplication or photocopy services. The act of photocopying is generally considered a clerical activity. To clarify that employees engaged in otherwise clerical activities are integral to classification 8019, and to minimize confusion, 8019 specifically includes clerical office employees. We now have some exercises to demonstrate some of the important concepts regarding standard exception employees. For each of the following 5 scenarios, review the job descriptions and determine whether each worker must be assigned to the employer's basic business classification or if they can be assigned to a standard exception classification. We'll be using the webinar poll function and give everybody a chance to select their answer. When the quick poll panel appears on your screen, select your answer on this quick poll panel and then click Submit. Take a moment to review this scenario. This general manager works primarily in an office performing clerical and administrative duties. Does the manager have any regular job duties that prevent assignment to a standard exception classification? Select your answer in the poll panel and click Submit. Okay, our results are showing that most of you, 56%, concluded that this general manager belongs in the machine shop classification. That's great. That is the correct answer here. Although this employee may spend most of their time in the office, they do have some job responsibilities that take them into the machine shop, and that's the key here. Part of their job requires that they're going into the machine shop. He's responsible for noting safety hazards, equipment in need of repair, and so on. that's part of his job. Because that's part of his job and it can't occur within the office, he is correctly assigned to the machine shop classification. Okay, next up we've got a Vice President of Sales. Are the job duties listed for this Sales Vice President consistent with assignment to a standard exception classification? Go ahead and select your answer when the poll panel appears. Okay, for this next question, we had a strong majority, 74% of you, saying that this VP of Sales qualifies for 8742. And that is correct. The idea here is that he works in an office, but he does have some outside exposure. Now, he may not be going out every day or every week even. He may be going out only a few times a year. But it's part of his job to go out and represent his employer in a public relations capacity, and that is consistent with 8742. Okay, next up we've got a question regarding district managers. These district managers spend a portion of their time in an office and a portion of their time away from the office. Are these duties consistent with assignment to a standard exception classification? So go ahead and select the answer that you believe applies. Okay, this is a smart crowd. 75% of the respondents concluded that these district managers belong in the restaurant classification, and that is absolutely correct. This is, however, a common mistake that we find when we do test audits. A lot of people think that this person looks very much like an outside salesperson, and in many respects they do. However, the key here is that these restaurant locations that the managers are visiting are the employer's own locations. And the managers have job duties that expose them to a restaurant workplace when they visit these restaurants. Because they're not limited to a clerical office environment when they're at their employer's own location, they really cannot be assigned to 8742. They are correctly assigned to 9079. Okay, now we've got a work-at-home bookkeeper. This employee works part-time at the employer's office, but part-time at home. Are these duties consistent with assignment to a standard exception class? Please mark your answers. Okay, we've got our results in, and 89% concluded that that employee qualifies as a clerical office employee, and that is correct. The employee's job duties are entirely clerical in nature. None of them created any exposure to the auto repair facility. Note that California does not have a separate classification for employees that telecommute or work from home. However, some other state jurisdictions do separately classify such employees. Also note that the employee's commuting activities are not a factor when determining the classification assignment. Commuting from home to work and back home is not a job-related travel duty. Okay, next up we've got a office receptionist. The office receptionist performs clerical work in a separated clerical workspace, but also walks through a sewing factory several times a day. Can this receptionist be assigned to a standard exception class? Please select what class they should be assigned to. Okay, the results are in on this, and it appears that 65% of you felt that the shop classification would apply and 31% felt clerical would apply. In this case, actually, clerical is the correct assignment. The office receptionist qualifies for assignment to 8810 clerical office employees as all job duties are clerical in nature and are performed in a separate clerical office workspace. The employee has no job duties that take place in the sewing factory environment. Their only exposure to the factory is for ingress and egress. And in many cases, when you see an employer's workspace, that's the reality. People need to be able to get to their office or get to their workstation. And so walking through the shop is not a job duty. It's merely an ingress and egress exposure, and it will not drive the classification assignment. The job duties for this employee were exclusively clerical in nature, and therefore this employee remains assignable to classification 8810. Okay, so why are we so precise in defining these employees? You know, people have often asked over the years, you know, can't we say if they're 90% clerical, that's close enough? The idea here is that these standard exception assignments are an exception to the general practice of assigning all employees to a single industry classification. These classifications have advisory premium rates that are among the lowest available. As most employers in California could retain some clerical office employees and outside salespersons, it's in the best interest of all employers that these rates be kept as low as possible. To keep rates low, it's necessary to carefully monitor which employees are assigned to standard exception classifications to ensure that no industry-specific exposures are included in the data for these classifications. So today's webinar has provided a basic introduction to the standard exception classifications, clerical office employees, and outside salespersons. We've talked about the payroll division restriction, the fact that these really are all or nothing classifications. You can't divide an employee partly as a standard exception and partly as any other classification. They either qualify for assignment to a standard exception class or they do not. We've talked about the separation requirements for clerical office employees and the important distinction between physical separation and clerical separation, which is somewhat easier to achieve. And then we've talked about a few special cases and run through some exercises. So next up, we're going to talk about some of the resources that are available to help you in successfully administering these classification assignments. On the WCIRB.com website, we'd like to draw your attention to the Agents and Brokers section. There's a wealth of information available to you there. The rules that we have covered today, for example, are found in the Uniform Statistical Reporting Plan at Part 3, Section 3, Rule 4, Standard Exceptions, and these rules are available to you as one of our publications through our website. So on the Agent and Broker page specifically, you can find out how to access experience modifications in inspection reports using WCIRB Connect. You can register for upcoming webinars. You can also sign up for WCIRB e-newsletters, such as the CTA Insight newsletter that we put out every Wednesday or every other Wednesday. In addition, you can watch education on demand videos that we've developed. We have on our website a classification search tool that we're continuously expanding and improving. What we're seeing right here is a mock-up of what you would see on the screen for this tool. You can search by classification code number, but you can additionally search based on keywords that are commonly associated with classification phraseologies. By clicking on the phraseology or code in the table, you'll be able to view detailed information regarding that classification, such as its USRP phraseology and footnotes, as well as any related rules and the pure premium rates for that classification. So right now what we're going to do is take a brief break out of the PowerPoint and just show you a live demonstration of that search tool. So you'll notice that on the first page of our website, if you look at the lower left-hand corner, there's a quick link to the classification search tool. This is one of the most popular tools available on our website. So here you see the screen where you can enter a keyword or a classification code. So if we were to enter a keyword, we could enter, for example, photocopy. And by entering the word photocopy, we've come up with several possible classifications that may apply. The idea here is that you will be able to review all of the information about each of these classifications and select the most applicable one for your employer. So let's look at the first classification here, 8019, suffix 2. Now what we've brought up on the screen is the complete USRP phraseology, including footnote for this classification. We're currently engaged in a multi-year project where we're expanding these classification definitions in the USRP to make them more helpful, more user-friendly. And so we've seen an example of that here. If you look at the footnote, the first paragraph tells you what the classification typically applies to. That's going to be consistent throughout all of our classifications going forward. So by reading that first paragraph, the idea is that you'll have a good sense as to whether this does or does not describe the employer that you're classifying. The next paragraphs that follow provide some specific instruction. So we tell you, for example, that the class does not apply to offset printing. If you had an employer engaged in offset printing, you could then go back to the search tool, search on offset printing, and find an answer. Finally, we tell you the class does not apply to the provision of legal support services, and we refer you specifically to classification 8821 for those services. So we've received a lot of positive feedback about the class search tool. We want to make sure that you're all aware of it and hopefully using it in your daily business. Okay. So we do have some upcoming workers' compensation webinars that we've scheduled. Disputing a WCIRB or insurer action is scheduled for Wednesday, August 12th. We've got a webinar on combination of entities, which is an ownership matter, scheduled for September 16th. And then experience rating eligibility is scheduled for October the 14th. Finally, we'd like to remind you all of InsureFest. The WCIRB will be appearing at InsureFest, and we hope to see you there.
Thank you, Brian. I'd now like to open the webinar for questions you might have. If you haven't already done so, please submit your questions in writing. Brian, if you have questions, could you please read those and answer them if you can?
Absolutely. So one question that's been asked is whether inside salespersons are considered 8742. I would have to say generally not. Now, we always tell people that it's very difficult to base a classification assignment on a job title. We need to really look at the job duties that go along with that, and it's not necessarily going to be the same for every employer that hires people they call inside salespersons. You do need to have some outside duties away from the employer's location to qualify for 8742 based on its definition. Inside salespersons may be working, for example, with a computer terminal or telephone, taking orders and inputting them. Those employees may in fact qualify as clerical office employees. Other people called inside salespersons may be working in a store type setting, and if so, they may be assignable to a store classification. So it really is going to boil down to the individual job duties performed by those employees. Got another question here saying that they've run across companies saying that if a person has to walk through an automobile shop, they belong in the automobile shop classification. How do we go about challenging that? I believe here you're probably making the comparison to our office bookkeeper who had the incidental ingress and egress exposure to the sewing shop. The bottom line is you're going to need to make an argument as to the person's job duties and where those job duties are performed. If you think back to the very first exercise that we had, we talked about a general manager. That general manager walked through the shop for only about 15 or 20 minutes every morning. That seems pretty incidental. But the reason that manager was assigned to the shop classification is that it was their job to do that walkthrough. Part of their responsibility was to walk through the shop every morning and look for safety hazards. Therefore, it was a job duty, although it was a minor part of their overall workday. Contrasted with the bookkeeper, no part of their job required them to walk through the shop other than the fact that they needed to get to their workspace. And so I would present that type of information to the insurer and explain that the assignment must be based on their job duties, not necessarily the fact that they have an incidental ingress or egress exposure. So we have another classification question here saying that they've got a location, or they've got a business that's got two locations. The first location is strictly an administrative office, and there's a maintenance employee for the administrative office exclusively. At the second location, they have a tile store, but presumably the maintenance employee never goes to the tile store location. So the question is, what classification should be assigned to the maintenance staff? If that maintenance staff is working solely and exclusively at the administrative office location and there is no tile store exposure at that location, assign classification 9015 to that maintenance employee. Okay, we've got a question about counter employees. If you have a counter with a receptionist greeting customers in a furniture store, would they be under the furniture store classification, or would they be assignable as a clerical office employee? In this context, it appears that this employee would be part of the furniture store operation. Greeting customers at a store location would be considered an integral store function. One of the techniques that we often use when you've got a situation like this and you're on the fence about whether the person qualifies as clerical or not, is to ask yourself this question: could I allow this person to work from home? Could I move this person across town without impacting the assignment or without impacting the operations here at my store location? If somebody's job duty is to greet all of the customers walking into the store and presumably find a store salesperson to assist them, it appears that that person is integral to the store operation. That person really couldn't fulfill their job duties if they were working from home. the way, for example, a payroll accountant could be allowed to work from home. So by asking yourself that question, you can very often sort of zero in on the job duties that may or may not qualify the person as a clerical office employee. Here, the fact that they're retained to greet customers at the store does that they are integral to the store operations. We do have some additional questions that have been posed. I think that in the interest of time, what I will do is respond to those additional questions by email, and David can ensure that you get the answers to your questions.
Great, thank you, Brian. That's all the time we have for questions. Any questions that, as Brian mentioned, that you have, we'll email you the answers to them. I want to thank Brian for spending time with us today and providing us his insight. If you would like to hear more on this subject, we will, as Brian mentioned, be presenting 3 additional workers' comp webinars, August 12th, September 16th, and October 14th. The registration for these webinars will be on our website, www.insurefest.org, and you can click the event tab there. In addition, WCIRB experts will keynote 2016 workers' comp changes and preview of the 2017 variable split at InsureFest, November 4th through the 6th at the Waterfront Beach Resort in Huntington Beach. For more information to register, visit the same website, www.insurefest.org. That concludes today's webinar. Thank you for participating. Have a great day.